I will start from one. We've appropriately defined it, but I don't think we have properly communicated it. People still see corruption as some form of distant conversation. So, in a way, even how they conduct way of life around public office or even in their private spaces, they don't see corruption happening. Sometimes they've colored the narrative to just look like, some people even say it's the grace of God, maybe some sort of divine favor, or some kind of opportunity, uncommon opportunity that they found. Whereas in all of those environments, it is a shortchanging of public resources and public authority and accumulating that for private gain. One thing that is very clear is that the impact on the cost of corruption is diffused on the public. I mean, the public or the people feel the impact of corruption in the end. So one thing that I'm always certain about is that public resources are finite. So public resources do not exist forever. They don't exist in perpetuity. There's a certain level of resources that government have, and if people take beyond what is necessary, if a road should cost 10 million naira and it is inflated to 15 million naira, so 5 million naira has been shortchanged to deliver another form of service. And so, in a way, when we define corruption, we talk about it in an abstract term. We have not looked at corruption like whoever who's involved in corruption, especially in public resources, is actually stealing a school, is actually stealing an hospital, is actually stealing the road, is actually stealing lives. So the way we have communicated it comes out from like abstract, and a lot of people still see it like, oh, maybe until I see it, until it's in my pocket, or until I take millions or billions, that's when I'm perpetuating corruption. And that externalization has not allowed us to be able to reflect that in our simple dealings with public service, we actually enable corruption. The second thing is also it takes two to tango, in my own view. And I think Zekwesli mentioned that about supply and demand side, two very equal sides that have to exist. If somebody is taken, then it means some people are given. Very, very critical to understand that the populace or the people also have normalized some sort of systems. For example, we've normalized paying above premium for passport collection, for driver's licenses, for every form of service point that has to go. And also just because the route to doing it in the proper way is made towards us, is made difficult. So people are just making adjustments and making acceptability to just do what they think is possible. So that approach of us not externalizing corruption and making it look as if it's people in public office that do it. We've created a culture that those who give, those who take, corruption is on both sides. And we are also not accepting responsibility of people that once in a while, in our own dealings with government, we perpetuate that. The third point I would make when it comes to issue of corruption is that it requires a systemic approach. I remember during the first subsidy crisis, I tried to dimension, corruption, during the just with Jonathan, I tried to dimension who was involved in the whole first subsidy process. And I found out that you had the Ministry of Finance, you had Customs, you had the Navy, you had private entity like Deloitte that was hired to oversee that process. You had MPA. There were too many institutions that were involved that should have been able to cut off corruption at every point in time. But what's very, very evident is that for corruption to thrive, it requires a system in some sort of way. Even procurement front means that the internal auditor is looking away, the procurement officer is looking away, the permanent secretary is looking away, the director for finance and accounts is looking away, and sometimes even the minister is looking away or the commissioner is looking away. So you have like almost 5 or 6 people embedded in corruption. And that's why that system, until someone breaks that cycle or stay out of that system, and the points no longer connect. But that's when you're able to take down corruption. So for us also to be able to tackle corruption, we must see it not as a standalone element, but understand that irrespective of institutions or processes or procedures that we have put in place, at the end of the day, corruption still happens because it requires a system, and the entire system finds a way around the institutions, around the structures that we have put in place to make happen. The final point for me in terms of corruption is that we also must be able to visualize the impact more to the public and be able to see. For example, um, there were reports recently around the marriage certificate in Ikoyi and how it's on to a huge racket with billions of naira being pocketed. Or reports around ICR did a report recently on how much Lagos gang lords pockets billions of naira annually. We must also enable third-party leaders, third sector leaders like NGOs, organizations to be able to, media, to be able to highlight corruption and be able to ensure that we bring the punitive element on top of that. That exactly is the missing line. There is no society, and I don't believe in there's a culture that has tendency to be corrupt or not. There is no society that left to its base instinct would not enable corruption. But once the penalty for being corrupt is higher, once the cost of being corrupt is higher, than the benefit, people adjust to those incentives. And how do we raise an incentive so that people understand that corruption has its consequences? And I think that's the big problem that we have failed not to resolve. And consequences not just for a few people, consequences not for ethnicity or for race or for gender, consequences are irrespective of who you are within a system, you are going to fear the brunt. My last point is on what Operation Car Wash that Mrs. Funke Adekaya-San mentioned. And it's a situation that touched the president, of Brazil. She had to resign, on the set, or even been impeached on the basis of that situation. And a whole lot of else were rolled over that situation. And even the former president was even had to be a sombrero. So in a way, when we say we want to fight corruption, or we want to show the cost of corruption, it's not something that we would expect that it's going to be a clerk that will serve. It will go right to the very top and will make the best examples out or worst examples out of that. Thank you very much. I will stop by this point.